60 checks, none of them cashed. 8 years of them, rubber-banded inside a blue plastic tote sitting in the middle of the burn pile, and a 71-pound Doberman named Pearl planted on top of that tote with her ears flat and her lip peeled up, while a man with a gasket told her to move. Emmett Rowe was 68 years old. He had worked that farm for 21 years. 9 days after his wife's funeral, everything he owned fit in a duffel bag, and the only living thing that still belonged to him was a dog who hadn't eaten in 3 days. He had no idea the state of Texas was sitting on $2.1 million with his wife's name attached to it. He found out because the dog wouldn't get off the box. 9 days earlier, the folding chairs were still stacked against the wall in the church basement. Emmett was at the sink in the Fellowship Hall of Cross Timbers Baptist, washing casserole dishes that nobody had come back for. 14 of them. Pyrex, mostly a few of the cheap aluminum trays with the cardboard lids, all of them scraped out and left on the counter with masking tape on the bottoms and names written in ballpoint. Doreen, K. Suggs, please return. Women had carried in green bean casserole and King Ranch chicken and 3 separate pans of banana pudding, hugged him with one arm the way people hug a man they don't know how to talk to, and gone home. Now it was 4:15 in the afternoon, and the fluorescent light was buzzing, and Emmett was standing there in a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up past his elbows, running hot water over a dish that wasn't his, in a building he had no reason to be in. He was 6'1", 190 pounds, and he had not carried an ounce of soft weight on him since 1978. Gray brush cut, high and tight, the same haircut he had worn for 40 years because he had never once considered another one. Deep lines around the eyes, the kind that come from squinting into water and sun and not from laughing. His forearms were burned dark to a hard line 3 inches above the wrist and again where the shirt sleeve ended, so that his upper arms were pale as paper and the rest of him looked like tack leather. Navy, 1978 to 1998. SEAL Team, 20 years for deployments he still did not talk about, and 2 he could not. Then a medical discharge, a bad back, a small pension, and a long, quiet stretch of nothing until a woman at a hardware store in Gatesville asked him if he knew anything about a well pump. His hands never learned to stay still. That was the thing people noticed about him and never mentioned. Standing in line, sitting in a pew, waiting on a doctor, his fingers moved. Rolling a bolt, folding a receipt into eighths, working a piece of baling wire into a shape and back out of it. At the funeral, he had folded the program into a square the size of a stamp and then unfolded it and smoothed it flat on his knee and folded it again. And when the pastor said Junie's full name, June Marie Rowe, Emmett's hands had stopped for exactly as long as it took to say it, and then started again. Junie was 66. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by the last week of June. 91 days from the scan to the graveside. That was the whole of it. The farm was 340 acres in Coryell County. Gently rolling, cedar and live oak on the north end, good bottom pasture on the south where the creek ran when it ran. Her daddy, Delbert Vance, had bought it in pieces in the 50s and 60s and died on it in 1994. Junie had been raised on it and had come back to it after her first marriage went bad, dragging 2 boys and a horse trailer full of furniture behind her. Emmett married her in 2004. And from the day he moved in, he worked it. 21 years. He rebuilt the fence line, every foot of it, 7 miles of 5-strand barbed wire and cedar posts he cut and set himself, because the old line was rusted to lace and the neighbors' cattle walked through it like a gate. He put a roof on the house in 2009, working alone in August, hauling bundles of shingles up a ladder one at a time. He drilled a new well in 2013 when the old one silted up, and when the driller quoted him for the pump house, he built it himself out of scrap lumber and did it better. He ran 2,000 feet of irrigation line to her garden, buried below the frost, with a shutoff at the house so she wouldn't have to walk out in January. He kept the tractor running 11 years past when it should have been sold. He fixed the barn doors. He fixed them again. He built her a craft room out of what had been Delbert's back office, put in a window on the north side for the light, hung the door himself, and shimmed it until it swung shut without a sound. And she filled the house with her handwriting. That's what it came down to, standing at the church sink. Every jar in the pantry had a lid with her handwriting on it in silver paint pen. Peach, 19. Bread and butter, August. Fig, don't eat all at once. Every toad in the craft room had a strip of masking tape on the end with a word in her hand. Fabric, buttons, winter, daddy. She labeled things the way other people breathed, automatically, without thinking, and it had driven him mildly crazy for 21 years, and now he could not throw away a coffee can because she had written coffee on it. 2 days before she died, in the room at the hospital in Temple with the machine ticking and the blinds half open, she had said something to him that he did not understand. She was on the morphine by then, and she came in and out of it, and she caught his hand and pulled it toward her chest and said it clear as a bell. Daddy's papers are with my paper. He said, okay, honey. She said it again the next morning. Same words, same order, like she was reading them off a card. Daddy's papers are with my paper. And then she was tired, and then she was asleep, and then there were 4 days of not much, and then there was a funeral. He thought she meant her will. He thought she was telling him where the will was. He was wrong about that in a way that would take him 31 days and 3 counties to understand. Pearl met him at the gate when he got home from the church that night with 14 washed casserole dishes in a milk crate on the passenger floorboard. She was 9 years old, black and rust Doberman, natural ears. Junie wouldn't have them cropped, said it was vanity done with a knife, 71 pounds on the vet scale in April, which was down 4 from her fighting weight. Gray had come into her muzzle over the last 2 years, a scattering of it around the mouth and over both eyebrows, so that she looked permanently concerned. Junie had brought her home as an 8-week-old in a cardboard box because a woman in Copper's Cove had a litter she couldn't move, and Junie had named her Pearl before they were out of the driveway. Pearl had not eaten in 3 days. Emmett had tried everything. Her food, then canned food, then chicken off the bone, then a scrambled egg with bacon grease, which was a thing Junie did on Christmas morning and only Christmas morning. Pearl walked over and put her nose on the plate and stood there and then walked away. She slept on Junie's side of the bed, not near it, on it, across the pillow, with her head where a head had been, and she would not be moved off it. And Emmett had stopped trying on the second night and started sleeping on his own side with his back to the empty space and his hand out behind him touching her ribs so he could feel them go up and down. And twice now, both times after midnight, she had gotten up off the bed and walked across the room and stood in front of the closet door and growled. Not barking. A low, unbroken sound weighed down in her chest, the kind a dog makes when she's telling you something and you're too dumb to hear it. Emmett had gotten up both times and opened the closet and turned on the light. Junie's dresses, shoe boxes, a vacuum cleaner, the smell of her. He'd said, "There's nothing in there, girl." Pearl had kept looking at the door after he shut it. The stepsons came on the 9th day, a little after 2 in the afternoon, in Cyrus's white crew cab. Cyrus, Mabry was 44 and thick through the neck and shoulders in a way that had been muscle in high school and was something else now. He wore pressed jeans with a crease ironed down the front and a wide leather belt with a tooled buckle he called his church belt, and a short-sleeve button-down tucked in tight. He kept his hair cut close on the sides and combed wet across the top. He had a way of standing with his thumbs hooked in that belt and his chin down like a man about to lead a prayer. Trent Mabry was 39, wiry, maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, with a patchy beard and a vape pen he pulled on constantly, in and out of his shirt pocket like a nervous tick. He wore his sunglasses up on his head indoors and outdoors both. He had never once in 21 years met Emmett's eyes for longer than half a second. He'd look at your shoulder, your ear, the wall behind you, and he'd nod along, and he'd say, "Yes, sir," and mean nothing by it. Cyrus got out of the truck with a manila folder in his hand. Emmett was on the porch steps with a socket wrench, taking the blade off a push mower he had no immediate plan to use, because his hands had to be doing something or he was going to come apart at the seams. Pearl came off that porch before anybody said a word. She didn't bark. She went down the 3 steps stiff-legged, her whole spine one straight line from tail to skull, her toenails clicking on the boards, and she walked out into the yard about 15 feet and stopped and turned side on, and she put herself dead between those 2 men and Emmett Rowe. The hair down the ridge of her back stood up in a dark stripe. Her tail didn't move. She had her head low and her eyes up, and she watched Cyrus's hands and not his face. Trent stopped walking. Hey, Emmett, get your dog." "She's fine," Emmett said. He set the wrench down on the step. She don't look fine. She's fine, Trent. Nobody had said anything yet. Nothing had happened yet. The folder was still closed, and the day was still just a hot Tuesday in July. But the dog knew, and Emmett would think about that later. In a motel room outside Gatesville with 60 envelopes laid out on a bedspread, that Pearl put herself in the road before a single word came out of anybody's mouth. They went inside. Cyrus asked for coffee, and Emmett made it. That was the strangest part of the whole afternoon, later remembering it, that he stood at his own stove and made coffee for 2 men and set out the sugar because Trent took 4 spoons and got down the mugs that had been Delbert's, and Pearl stood the entire time in the kitchen doorway with her shoulder against the doorframe and did not sit down once. Cyrus opened a folder on the kitchen table. "We didn't want to do this so quick," he said, "but there's things that have to get squared away, and Trent's got to be back in Waco Thursday." He slid the first page across. Warranty deed, Coryell County, recorded 1994. Grantee, Junie Marie Vance. One name, just hers. "You know it was never in your name," Cyrus said. "Mama kept it that way. Daddy Vance set it up that way, and she never changed it." "I know what the deed says," Emmett said. He didn't know. He'd always known. It had never been a thing that mattered on any day before this one, because on every day before this one, Junie was in the house. Cyrus slid the second document over. Last Will and Testament of Junie Marie Rowe, dated 2011, 2 witnesses, notarized. Emmett read it standing up because he didn't want to sit down for it. It devised the described farm tracts, all 4 of them, by survey and abstract number, 340 acres total, to Cyrus Wayne Mabry and Trent Allen Mabry, share and share alike. The trucks, both of them, to the sons. The accounts at First Coryell, by number, to the sons. There was a line in there about Emmett having a life estate in the residence, and Cyrus had a printed email from a lawyer in Killeen clipped to it saying the life estate language was defective, ambiguous, unenforceable, and that the sons could take possession. Emmett read it twice, the second time slower. His hands, for once, were completely still on the tabletop. "She never told me," he said. "She wouldn't have," Cyrus said. "She'd have known what you'd say. 21 years I put into this place. That fence out there, that well, that roof over your head right now." And that was when Cyrus Mabry said the part out loud, in the kitchen, with his coffee going cold and his thumbs hooked in that tooled leather belt, in a voice as calm and reasonable as a man reading announcements. 21 years of labor is a job, Emmett. A job doesn't come with a deed. Trent looked at the refrigerator. "You got till Friday," Cyrus said. "Take your clothes, your tools, whatever's got your name on it. There's a duffel in the hall closet. I saw it. And take the dog. Nobody here wants the dog." Pearl, in the doorway, had not moved an inch and had not stopped watching Cyrus Mabry's hands. By 4:40 that afternoon, Trent had found the craft room. Emmett heard it before he saw it, the flat scrape of plastic being dragged across pine boards, then the thud of a tote hitting the porch steps, then another. He came around the corner of the house with the duffel bag, still empty in his hand, and found Trent Mabry hauling Junie's totes out the side door 2 at a time, stacking them in the bare dirt patch between the propane tank and the burn barrel where they'd burned tree limbs and feed sacks for 21 years. Levantotas. Some blue, some clear, one red one with a cracked lid held down by a bungee cord. Junie's handwriting on masking tape labels on every single one of them. That tight looping cursive she used on jar lids and calendar squares and the inside covers of her cookbooks. Quilt scraps. Winter. Buttons plus notions. Daddy. Cyrus stood by the burn barrel with a red 5-gallon gas can hanging off 2 fingers, easy, like a man holding a lunch pail. "What are you doing?" Emmett said. It didn't come out as a question. "Cleaning out," Cyrus said. "House has to be shown by the 15th. Nobody wants to walk into a room full of that." "That's her sewing. That's junk that smells like a dead woman," Cyrus said. He said it plain. No heat in it. That was the part Emmett would remember later, sitting in a motel room with the numbers spread out in front of him. That Cyrus Mabry hadn't raised his voice one time all day. A man who has already decided he owns everything doesn't need to raise his voice. Trent set the last tote down and wiped his palms on his jeans and pulled the vape out of his shirt pocket. And Pearl came off the porch. She didn't run. That was the thing. 9 years old, 71 pounds, gray coming in around that black and rust muzzle. 3 days since she'd taken food, and she came down those 4 steps at a walk, stiff through the shoulders, ears up, her nails clicking once on each board. She walked past Emmett. She walked past Trent close enough that he took a half step back and didn't say anything about it. She went straight into the middle of that pile of plastic, and she put her nose down on a blue tote near the bottom of the stack, and she breathed on it twice. And she sat down on it. 71 pounds of Doberman on a lid rated for storage of holiday decorations. The plastic bowed under her and made a sound like a knuckle popping. She squared up her front feet on either side, and she faced the 2 men, and she did not blink. "Get," Trent said. Her did not get. "Emmett, call your dog." "She's not mine," Emmett said. "She's Junie's." He heard himself say it in the present tense and didn't correct it. Cyrus set the gas can down in the dirt and looked at the dog for a long moment, the way a man looks at a gate latch that isn't working the way it's supposed to. "Trent," he said, "move her." Trent came at it the way men like Trent always come at it, from the side, fast, one hand out for the collar, and the other hand still holding the vape because it never crossed his mind that this would take both hands. His fingers hooked onto the chain link at the back of her neck, and he pulled. Pearl turned her head. She didn't bite him. 9 years old and 3 days without food, and she still had the timing. Her jaws came together on empty air 1 inch off the inside of his wrist, that dry, hard clack that carries across a yard, the sound of a screen door slamming inside a barrel. And Trent went backward so fast he sat down in the dirt with his boot heel in the gas can and knocked it over on its side. The cap wasn't tight. Gasoline glugged out into the dust, and the smell of it came up hot and sweet in the afternoon heat. Nobody moved for 4 full seconds. Pearl was still sitting on the tote. She hadn't stood up. She hadn't come off it an inch. She had turned her head, closed her mouth on nothing, and turned back, and now she was watching Cyrus again, because even down in the dirt with his hand shaking, Trent was not the one she was worried about. "Jesus," Trent said. "That thing's rabid. That thing's grieving," Emmett said. He walked into the pile. He crouched down beside her. 68 years old, 6'1", hands that never learned how to stay still, and they were steady now the way they had been steady in 1983 in water he still didn't talk about. And he put one palm flat on Pearl's chest and felt her heart going like a fence charger. She leaned into him. She did not get off the tote. "Off, girl," he said quiet. "Let me get it." She stood up. Emmett slid the blue tote out from under the stack and got his arms around it. It wasn't heavy. 12, 14 pounds. He could feel something inside it shift and settle when he tipped it, soft like a folded blanket. Masking tape on the end. Junie's handwriting. "Quilt scraps, do not wash." Cyrus stood up straight off the burn barrel. "Now hold on. You said take what's got my name on it," Emmett said. "This has got my wife's name on it, and I'm the one that put her in the ground 9 days ago. I'm taking 1 tote." Cyrus looked at it. Emmett watched him do the arithmetic. A plastic box of fabric, a 68-year-old man, a dog that had just put its teeth an inch from his brother's wrist bone, and a 5-gallon can of gasoline lying on its side in the dirt between all of them. "Let him have the craft junk," Cyrus said. That's the sentence. If this story has a hinge, that's it. 6 words from a man in a pressed church belt, standing over 110 pounds of what he thought was scrap cotton. Emmett walked out of that yard with the tote against his chest, and Pearl walked the whole 40 yards to the truck pressed so hard against his left leg that he had to shorten his stride to keep from stepping on her. She never once looked back at the pile. She had gotten what she came for. Behind him, he heard the other 10 totes go over into the burn barrel one at a time, and then the whump of the gasoline catching. He didn't turn around for that either. The motel was out on 84 west of Gatesville, 12 units in an L, a sign with a burned-out arrow, $61 a night plus tax, and a $10 pet fee the woman at the desk waved when she saw Pearl's face through the truck window. Room 9, 2 double beds, a window unit that ran loud, a bedspread the color of weak coffee. Emmett brought in the duffel, the tote, a paper sack of dog food, and nothing else. 21 years on a place, and everything he owned in the world fit in 2 trips. He ran cold water into the ice bucket and set on the floor, and put 2 cups of kibble on a paper plate beside it, and sat down on the end of the bed with his elbows on his knees, and he watched a 9-year-old Doberman who had not eaten since Thursday walk over, sniff it, look at the door, look at the tote sitting on the luggage rack, and then put her head down and eat every bite. 68 years old, and it was the first thing that had gone right in 9 days, and it undid him more than the funeral had. He put a hand over his eyes and sat there a while. At 11 o'clock that night, he opened the tote. The lid came off with that hollow pop. On top, fabric. Just fabric, exactly like the label said. Squares of it, cut and stacked and bundled with hair ties. Calico, a blue chambray he recognized as one of his own worn-out work shirts. Half a flour sack. A Ziploc bag of loose buttons, maybe 400 of them, tortoise shell and pearl and brass. The kind of thing a woman collect for 50 years off of every coat that ever wore out at her house. He turned the bag over in his hands and put it down carefully on the bedspread because his hand had started up again. Under the buttons, a quilt panel. Unfinished. A 9-patch, hand-pieced cream and dark red, with the needle still stuck through it and 18 inches of quilting thread trailing off the needle. She'd been in the middle of a row. He lifted it out, and under the quilt panel, lying flat in the bottom of the tote, was a brick. That's what it looked like. A brick of paper 4 inches thick, wrapped twice around with 2 brown rubber bands gone brittle and cracked. Envelopes. White window envelopes. All the same size, all the same weight, stacked square, and true the way a woman stacks things when she's put them in a place on purpose. Emmett set it on the bedspread under the lamp and slid one out. Cardinal Ridge Operating Company, printed in the corner in that dark green oil patch lettering. A Midland, Texas return address. Postmarked. Never opened. Not one crease, not one thumbprint, not one slit along the top. He slid out another. Same. Another. Same. He fanned them out across the bedspread with the flat of his hand, and they came apart like a deck of cards. 60 of them. 60 white rectangles with a little clear window in each one, and through every window a name. Not Junie's name. Delbert Vance. Emmett Rowe sat down on the floor with his back against the bed frame, which is not a thing a man with his knees does on purpose. Delbert Vance. Junie's daddy. The man in the one photograph in the hall, standing next to a farmal in a snap-button shirt, squinting. The man who had left Junie the 4 tracts of Coryell County dirt that Emmett had spent 21 years fencing and roofing and irrigating. The man who had died in the last week of March in 1994, 32 years before that night, for years before Emmett ever met his daughter. He got the little knife off his belt and slit one open. A check, perforated stub still attached. Cardinal Ridge Operating Company, Royalty Distribution. Pay to the order of Delbert R. Vance. On the stub, a column of numbers he didn't understand yet. A property number, a decimal interest carried out to 8 places, a production month, a gross severance tax, a net. The amount was $17,911.42. He sat very still. He slit the next one. $18,206.80. The next, $16,447.15. He went to the bottom of the stack, to the oldest postmark, and the date on it was 8 years back. And he went to the top of the stack, and the newest one had come to a mailbox on a county road in Coryell County 5 weeks ago, while Junie was in a hospital bed in Temple with a plastic clip on her finger. 60 envelopes. 8 years. None of them opened. None of them cashed. And folded flat beneath where the brick had lain, pressed against the bottom of the tote so long it had taken the shape of it, was a single sheet of onion skin paper gone the color of weak tea, with a county clerk stamp in the corner and a filing date of March 1961. Mineral lease and royalty certificate. A 1/16th royalty interest reserved unto Delbert R. Vance, his heirs and assigns forever, in and under 480 acres out of Section 14, Block 2, Reagan County, Texas. Reagan County, 400 miles west of that motel room. Big Lake, the Permian, never transferred, never probated into anybody else's name. Still sitting, 65 years later, in the name of a man who had been dead since 1994. Daddy's papers are with my paper. She'd said it twice in that hospital room, and he'd thought she was talking about the will. She'd been talking about her quilt scraps. I want you to think about something for a second, because it's the part of this that keeps me up. That tote sat in a burn pile in the dirt for maybe 11 minutes. 10 others just like it went into a barrel with 5 gallons of gasoline that same afternoon and were ash by dark. The only reason this one didn't was that a 9-year-old dog with a gray muzzle, who hadn't eaten in 3 days, walked into a pile of plastic and put her body on the one box that mattered and dared a grown man to move her. How many of these boxes get burned every year in this country before a dog gets there? How many 1/16th interests are still sitting in a dead man's name in some county clerk's index right now, in a state file marked abandoned, because nobody opened the envelope? If that question bothers you even a little, do me a favor and hit subscribe before we go on, because what happens next is the part where a man with a duffel bag and no address finds out exactly what the law says about who those checks belong to, and the answer is not what his stepsons thought it was. Emmett didn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, he stripped the coffee-colored bedspread flat and squared the corners the way you square a rack, and he laid all 60 envelopes out across it in rows of 10. 6 rows. He put them in order by postmark, oldest at the top left, newest at the bottom right. And he stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed and looked at them for a long time the way he used to look at a chart before a swim. Pearl got up on the other bed, which she was not allowed to do in any house she had ever lived in, and lay down facing the Tote and slept. Marguerite Deal kept an office on the north side of the county square in Gatesville, in a narrow brick building between a title company and a shop that sold monogram things, with her name in gold leaf on the glass and a bell over the door that had been there longer than she had. She was 54 years old, built short and solid, with a steel gray bob-cut blunt at the jaw and reading glasses pushed up into it, and she wore a navy blazer over a pearl snap shirt and boots that had actual dirt on them. Her handshake was one hard pump. She had a coffee mug on her desk from a 4-H fundraiser in 1998 and a wall of Texas Property Code volumes with cracked spines, and she looked at Pearl coming through her office door and said, "She can stay if she doesn't chew anything." And that was all she said about it. Everybody called her Margot. Emmett set the Tote on her desk and took the lid off and didn't say anything at all, because he'd rehearsed 4 different ways to explain it in the truck, and every one of them sounded like a lie. Margot pulled the glasses down out of her hair. She read the 1961 certificate first, twice, holding it at the edges. Then she picked up one check, then a second, then the oldest one and the newest one, and she laid them side by side and looked at the decimal interest on the stubs for a while without saying a word. Then she asked for the will. Emmett had the copy Cyrus had left on the kitchen table. She read it the way a farrier looks at a hoof. Fast over most of it, slow in one spot. She read the whole thing through, and then she went back to the second page and set her finger on a paragraph near the bottom and read it out loud. I devised the following described real property, to wit, tracts 1 through 4, Vance Survey, Abstract 411, Coryell County, together with the improvements thereon, and the following described personal property, to wit, the accounts held at First Coryell State Bank, account numbers as listed on Exhibit A, and the 2 motor vehicles described on Exhibit B, unto my sons Cyrus Wayne Mabry and Trent Allen Mabry, share and share alike. She looked up over the glasses. That's a specific devise, Mr. Rowe. That is a list, and a list is only as long as what's on it. She turned the page. All the rest, residue, in remainder of my estate, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, I give and bequeath unto my husband, Emmett Rowe, if he survives me. Margot took her glasses off. Your wife's sons took everything she wrote down, she said. Nobody wrote this down. Not in 1961, not in 1994, not in 2011. A 1/16th royalty under 480 acres in Reagan County is not a farm tract in Coryell County, and it is not an account number at First Coryell. It falls to the residue. The residue is you. Emmett didn't say anything for a second. Out on the square, a truck went by with a bad belt. Then I cashed them, he said. No. Margot set both hands flat on the desk. You can't cash a single one of these. They're payable to a man who's been dead 32 years, and half of them are stale dated anyway. And there's a bigger problem. She tapped the oldest postmark. 8 years, Mr. Rowe. When an operator can't get a royalty owner to cash a check, Texas gives them 3 years, and then the law makes them turn that money over to the state. Every dollar Cardinal Ridge couldn't deliver to Delbert Vance is sitting in unclaimed property at the Texas Comptroller's office in Austin right now. Sitting there how long? Margot pulled a legal pad toward her and uncapped a pen. Longer than 8 years, she said. These 60 envelopes are just the ones that made it to her mailbox. The grind did not look like money. It looked like a 1998 F-250 with 214,000 miles on it and a dog in the passenger seat. Margot Deal gave him a list on the second visit. Affidavit of heirship for Delbert Vance, executed by 2 disinterested witnesses who knew the man in life and stood to gain nothing by his death. Certified copy of Junie's death certificate. Certified copy of the marriage license, Coryell County, 2005. Letters testamentary. Av Jivinch. A division order from Cardinal Ridge Operating, which they would not send until they had a title opinion, which they would not order until somebody filed the affidavit in the county where the minerals lay. Reagan County, Margot said. Big Lake, 204 miles from this office. I've got gas, Emmett said. The first witness was a man named Otis Lemons, 84, who lived in a brick house in Killeen with an oxygen line in his nose and a photograph of a 1959 drilling crew over the television. He'd run a rig floor with Delbert Vance for 2 seasons. He signed with a hand that shook so bad Margot had to hold the corner of the page down. Delbert used to say that lease was his retirement, Otis said. Then he went and died at 61, and I guess it retired without him. The second witness was a woman named Wanda Kirchner, 79, Junie's mother's cousin, who came to Margot's office in a church coat in June because that's what you wore to a lawyer. She signed. She asked if the boys knew. Margot said not yet. Wanda pressed her lips together and said nothing, which in that family was a whole speech. Emmett drove to Big Lake 3 times. The first time, the deputy clerk sent him home because the affidavit wasn't notarized on the right page. The second time, the recording fee was $17 short of what he had in his shirt pocket, and the ATM in the Allsops was down. He slept in the truck bed outside a shut cafe with Pearl on the tailgate and drove back in the morning when the bank opened. The third time it went through, and a woman behind the counter stamped a book and page number onto the top right corner in purple ink and slid it back across without looking up, and that purple stamp was the first thing in 9 days that had gone Emmett's way on the first try. Pearl would not ride without the tote. He learned that on the first trip. He'd put the blue tote behind the seat, tidy, out of the way, and open the passenger door, and the dog stood in the motel lot with her feet planted and her ears back and would not load. He tried twice. He said her name in the voice she'd always come to. She looked at the truck and then at him and did not move an inch. So he pulled the tote out from behind the seat and sat on the bench beside him, and Pearl got in and lay down with her chin on the lid. After that, it was just how they traveled. 408 miles round trip with a 9-year-old Doberman using a plastic storage box as a pillow, and Emmett with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the lid between them at every stoplight in every town from Gatesville to Big Lake. In Midland, he met the landman. Royce Hallenbeck was 61, sun-cured to the color of saddle, a hat line across his forehead so sharp it looked drawn on, snap-button shirt tucked in his starched jeans, reading glasses hanging on a shoestring. He worked contract title for 3 operators, and he had Cardinal Ridge's file open on the hood of his own truck because his office was, in his words, wherever he parked. He ran a thumb down a title chain that went back to 1961 and whistled through his teeth. You know what we call this? Royce said, orphaned interest. Nobody died wrong. Nobody stole anything. A man just passed, and nobody ever filed a piece of paper telling the county who got his minerals. Happens more than you believe. How long's it been orphaned? Royce checked the last transfer date and did the arithmetic out loud. 31 years, he said. 31 years this interest has been paying out to a dead man, and the operator's been cutting checks to a mailbox and hoping. Where'd the money go? Where it always goes. Royce took his glasses off. Austin. By then, Emmett had a routine. Motel at $61 a night through the end of June, then a room over a feed store at $400 a month with a window unit that rattled. He put out 16 fence posts a week for a rancher on the Emmett Road for cash, because his hands would not sit still and because $61 a night eats a man alive. Pearl came to work with him. She lay in the shade of the truck with her chin on the tote and watched him drive posts and did not eat unless he ate first. Word got out in July, the way it does in a county where the courthouse clerk goes to the same church as everybody's aunt. They came to Margot's office on a Thursday afternoon without an appointment. Cyrus Mabry, 44, thick through the chest and thicker through the middle, pressed jeans, that wide church belt with the tooled edge, boots he had cleaned in the parking lot. Trent Mabry, 39, wiry, hollow-cheeked, vape pen turning over in his fingers, eyes going to the door frame and the carpet and the window and never once to a face. They had a lawyer from Waco with them, a young one in a suit that fit him, and the young one did most of the talking for about 4 minutes. Estate property, fruits of the decedent's inheritance, constructive trust, undue influence on a grieving elderly man, which was a strange thing to say when the grieving elderly man in the room was the one they'd handed a duffel bag to. Margot let him finish. She had that habit. She let people run all the way out to the end of their rope, and then she looked at what they tied to it. Then Cyrus got tired of paying by the hour for somebody else's vocabulary. "Let me say it plain," he said. He turned in the chair and put his eyes on Emmett for the first time since he'd walked in. "That came off Mama's daddy's land," Cyrus said. "That's blood. Your hired help with a wedding ring." The office was quiet. The window unit hummed. Trent looked at the carpet. Margot Deal, 54, silver at the temples, reading glasses pushed up in her hair, reached over and pulled the will across her desk without hurrying. She found the page. She put the glasses down onto her nose, and she read the residuary clause a second time, out loud, slower than she'd read the first time, the way you'd read a road sign to somebody who'd already missed the turn once. "All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate," she read, "of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, I give and bequeath unto my husband, Emmett Rowe, if he survives me." She took the glasses off. "Your mother wrote a list," she said. 2 farm tracts, 2 bank accounts, 2 trucks. You got every single thing on that list, gentlemen, and you got fast. What's not on the list goes to the residuary beneficiary, and the residuary beneficiary is sitting to your left." She squared the pages. "Blood isn't a legal instrument. Neither is a wedding ring. A will is." She wrote one. You read it out loud in his kitchen. The Waco lawyer asked about a settlement. "There's nothing to settle," Margot said. "There's nothing you own." Cyrus stood up so hard the chair skidded. At the door he stopped and turned back, and this is the part Emmett would remember because Cyrus didn't look at Margot. He looked at the blue plastic tote sitting on the floor by Emmett's boot with the dog's chin on the lid. He'd seen that tote before, in the side yard, under the gas can. He didn't say anything. He went out. The division order came on August 12th. It ran 4 pages, and it was mostly decimals, and down at the bottom, under current monthly revenue attributable to interest, somebody at Cardinal Ridge had typed a number. $18,400. A month. Every month. Since before Junie got sick, since before the fence line, since before Emmett Rowe had ever set foot on that farm. The comptroller's letter came 9 days after that, and Margot read it aloud in her office with the door shut, because she said a man ought to hear a thing like this in a voice and not off a page. Pursuant to Chapter 74 of the Texas Property Code, she read, the Comptroller of Public Accounts has approved claim number 4162298 and hereby releases unclaimed property held on behalf of the estate of Delbert R. Vance to the claimant, Emmett Rowe, as surviving spouse of the sole heir, in the amount of $2,116,000. She stopped. She looked at him over the top of the page. $2,116,000, she said again. Stapled behind, it was the first division order check from Cardinal Ridge Operating, the current month, made out to a living man for $18,400. Emmett said thank you. He shook her hand. He picked up the tote and walked out through the little waiting room past the ficus and the magazines and out the glass door onto the square, and he got into the truck. He sat there 11 minutes without starting it. Pearl put her head over onto his leg. He kept one hand on the back of her neck, in that spot behind the ears where the black went soft and the gray had started coming in, and he watched the courthouse across the street and did not move. Then he started the truck and drove to the feed store and paid August rent in cash, because that's what he'd gotten in the truck to do. The Mabrys went under fast and quiet, and mostly on their own. Cyrus had borrowed against the home place in the spring to cover a note on a skid steer and a base boat. Trent hadn't paid the 25 property taxes, and neither had Cyrus, because each one had told the other he'd handle it. The bank posted the 80 home acres, the house, the barn, the craft room with its door taken off the hinges, for a substitute trustee sale, first Tuesday of the month, courthouse steps, Gatesville. The notice ran in the paper for 3 weeks. Margot circled it and slid it across the desk without a word. Emmett read it twice and said, "Can I bid?" "You can bid," she said. "You'll want a cashier's check." First Tuesday, October. 51 degrees at 10 in the morning, a flat white sky, 20-some people on the north steps with coffee. Emmett wore a clean pressed shirt and his good boots and stood front row with Pearl sitting a heel, and every person there looked at the dog before they looked at him. Cyrus and Trent came at 10:04 and stood 3 rows back. The trustee opened the bidding at $320,000. Emmett went to $330. A man from Copper's Cove went to $350. Cyrus, horse, went to $365. Emmett went to $375. Cyrus went to $390,000, and Emmett heard Trent say something behind him, low and fast, and Cyrus said nothing back. Emmett said $412,000. Nobody said anything. The trustee said it once. Twice. Third and final. The gavel didn't fall on a gavel. It was a folded newspaper against a rail, and it made a flat little sound like a screen door. And Emmett Rowe turned all the way around before he signed a single line. He looked at Cyrus Mabry, 44, in his pressed jeans and his church belt, and then at Trent, 39, who for once was looking straight back at him. 21 years of labor is a job, Emmett said. You told me that in my own kitchen. Nobody answered him. You burned her craft junk in the side yard, he said. Everything she ever wrote down, you took in an afternoon. Everything she didn't, you set on fire. He nodded once, the way he'd nodded at officers for 20 years. The dog sat down on it, he said. That's all that happened. The dog sat down and wouldn't get up. Then he turned around and signed his name, and Pearl stood up when he stood up because she always did. He got the house back on a Thursday. The craft room door was in the barn, leaned against a stall with a boot print in the lower panel. He carried it in, set the hinge pins, hung it plumb, and worked the knob twice to make sure it caught. He swept out the room. He put a new pane in the window over the shelf where the sun came in yellow at 4 in the afternoon, because that's the hour Junie had always worked in there, with the radio on the station that played the old stuff. Then he set the blue plastic tote on the shelf under that window. All 60 envelopes were still inside it, banded the way he'd found them, every one slit open now along the top edge with a pocket knife, every one empty of everything but the paper that made it real. He left them there. He didn't need them anymore. That wasn't the point. Pearl came in behind him, walked the length of the room once, and lay down across the doorway with her front paws over the threshold. 9 years old, 71 pounds, black and rust, gray coming in heavy across the muzzle now, one ear up and one ear folded, breathing slow in the last of the 4 o'clock light. She lay across the door of the room she saved, on the ground she bought back. 60 checks nobody opened. 21 years nobody counted. 9 days that took everything. And one old dog who sat down on a box in a burning pile and would not get up. If Pearl had moved when they pulled her collar, would any of it have been found? Tell me yes or no.